On this episode of What's Going On with Shipping, the G7 and the European Union are about to implement a Russian oil price cap. I'm your host, Sal Mercogliano. Welcome to today's episode. So, a price cap, what do we mean? Well, these two organizations, the G7 and the European Union, are mandating as of December 5th that Russian oil transported on tankers will only be able to be sold below a certain threshold, which they haven't identified yet. Let me be clear. We don't know what that cap is, even though it's just a few weeks away. And the enforcement method for this is straightforward. The way they're going to implement this is by getting the 13 large P&I clubs. These are the protection indemnity clubs. These are the entities that insure the cargo on board vessels to not insure any cargo that's over that price cap. They're not doing a blockade. They're not going to be stopping ships. But the way they're doing this is through an insurance mechanism. And the hope here is twofold. Number one, they want to keep Russian oil flowing because they can't afford the disruption this would cause. If they just cut off Russian oil, which would be the easiest thing, that would have ramifications across the entire globe as all of a sudden Russian oil is no longer in the system. And one of the things we've seen is that while there are sanctions against Russia, the oil is still flowing. It's just going to different places. The second element here is they want to punish Putin for the invasion of Ukraine. And the way they see to do that is by lowering the price of Russian oil, thereby not giving him windfall profits, which he hasn't been getting anyway. Let's be clear that Ural oil is already selling about $20 a barrel cheaper than most Western oil. So he's already suffering this. The question is, what is going to happen as a result of this, and what's on the horizon for the global tanker market? And one of the things that I am saying is that this is going to have ramifications akin to the container ship supply chain disaster we saw over the past 2 years. And that's why this story is so important. All right, we're going to jump into this by looking at a series of stories and talking about this. Before we do so, hey, take a minute, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you'll be alerted about new videos as they come out. All right, let's go ahead and jump into this story. So we're going to look at a couple of stories here, and each of these stories have a little bit of detail for us to look at. So the first one is a G-Captain story by Bloomberg. Russia's war rewires global crude trades. And so one of the big things that we're seeing that's going to about happen here is an issue regarding the hauling of cargo over distances. So this chart here kind of gives you an idea of how Russian oil was getting into the European Union. It looks largely just purely at the European Union. So if you go back to January of 2022, one of the things we saw is that the vast majority of EU oil was coming from Russia. And you'll see on the left there that chart, with most of it coming from the Baltic and then from the Black Sea. Now, in both those cases, that's a very short haul. In other words, a very short distance to sail your cargo. By September, we're down 1.1 million barrels per day, and by December 5th, you cut all of it off. The remaining 1.5 million barrels go away. Now, they were already receiving oil from other sources. Go to January 22, that slide on the right just below me. You'll see that they're getting their oil from West Africa, from the U.S. Gulf, from the Middle East, and from Latin America. Now, they've increased that since January by 1.1 million barrels, so they offset the loss by getting it from these areas, increasing the output. But the question is, come December 5th, where are they going to get the difference, that net difference? Where are they going to get the 1.5 million barrels per day necessary to offset that oil? And this is where countries like Venezuela, Iran are coming into question, all regarding this. Now, there's a couple of key points in the story I want to raise here. Number one, what we're going to see here is an increase in ton miles. Now, we're not just talking about tonnage. We're not just talking about the distance to haul a ton of oil. We're talking about also the increase in miles to haul a ton of oil. So when you're hauling from the Baltic and the Black Sea to Europe, that's a short sail, very short distance you're involved. If you're sailing to West Africa, the U.S. Gulf, Middle East, or Latin America, that is a much longer sail. And what you're increasing is not just the tons, but the miles. And this is a figure known as ton miles. And ton miles occupies more tankers. You need more tankers for every ton of fuel because of the mileage increase. We've already seen that happen here. So we've seen that jump by 4%. But what we can expect to see is it increase even more. This is having an impact of raising the charter rate for vessels. Right now we're seeing some charter rates up to about $100,000 per day on these spot charters. We have another problem at the same time with the age of the tanker fleet. Most of the shipbuilding that's being done right now is largely either LNG gas tankers or container ships. Very few tankers are being built. As a matter of fact, the inventories are an 18-year low. Average age for a tanker right now is about 12 years old. This is the smallest and the oldest we've seen the fleet since 2004. And the question here is what happens. Now, there's going to be an influx of money in here. According to this story, VLCCs, these are the very large crude carriers. Now, I would say VLCCs are the extreme. There's a larger size than that called the ultra-large crude carriers, but VLCCs are the common ones you see moving crude oil. You have smaller versions of these tankers, what are called LRs and MRs, long-range and medium-range tankers, but they tend to haul refined fuel, although some do carry crude. But what we're seeing is probably a VLCC rate. Right now, it's running about before this, it was running about $33,000 per day. That's an average over the past decade. We could expect to see this jump to about $56,000 to $60,000 per day. And in the wintertime, when it spikes, you can see jumps of $100,000 per day, even maybe as high as $200,000 per day. So all of this means it's going to be much more expensive to haul crude. There's less tankers available, and Europe has got to figure out where the heck they're going to get that other 1.5 million barrels per day to meet the shortfall that goes away on December 5th. On the flip side, Russia has to get ready for all of a sudden losing its sale of oil to the European Union and the G7 countries. Once this goes into effect, and again, it goes into effect on December 5th, and we don't know what the price cap is, there's going to be a question about how this is done, how efficiently it's done. The plan, again, is to use those 13 P&I clubs. This is them right here. This is the international group of P&I clubs. If you don't understand what P&I clubs are, I could spend the time telling you about it, but they actually have a great kind of Saturday morning Schoolhouse Rock video here that I'll include in the show notes that you can watch that talk all about what these clubs are and what they do. The way this works is the P&I clubs are going to set the price. Now, I have a big question about this. What if they don't use one of these 13 P&I clubs? Now, these are the major ones. These are the big ones. What if they either don't insure the vessels, self-insure the vessels, or come up with a new P&I club? These are all questions that we need to be asking ourselves. Well, there's a couple of provisions for this that we already kind of see happening here. So one of the things we've seen is Russia is busily creating the shadow fleet or the ghost fleet. There's a couple of names for this floating around. But they are on the market purchasing vessels. And this is from a story and some research done by BRS that is looking at recent tanker sales. And what we're seeing here is the creation of this kind of shadow tanker fleet out there that is developing. These are not at the same scales, these two charts, so be careful about that. So like this one here, the VLCCs you're seeing here is about 110 vessels. Over here it's about 18 vessels. But what you're seeing here in blue is the potential sales to Russia. Other countries in here are Iran, Venezuela, and third parties. So one of the things that Russia is doing is because of sanctions against Russian flag, Russian-owned vessels, they are using the international shipping industry, which is a myriad of mirrors and smoke, to basically hide vessels. Some of this oil is going to be coming out of the Baltic and the North Sea. They're going to be coming out in ice-reinforced tankers, probably Russian-owned, Russian-flag tankers. And you're going to be seeing a lot of ship-to-ship transfers where ships moor alongside one another and transfer their fuel over to other tankers, including some of these. We're already seeing that. We're seeing that out off the coast of West Africa, the Eastern Atlantic. We're seeing it out in the Pacific. We're seeing more and more of these ship-to-ship transfers without any regards to pollution control and safety in many measures. The danger of an oil spill is increasing exponentially as this goes on. And understand what these tankers are doing are turning off their AIS, they're going dark, not being seen, and so unless you have satellite or visual confirmation of them or you're tracking them by another means, you lose sight of these vessels, which means you lose sight of the cargo, which is really key. And all of this means that we're seeing these being done. We already see, in the case of classification societies, a new classification society out of Dubai come into existence, the Union Marine Classification Society. So it's not going to be surprising if you're seeing a new classification society. This is the third-party agency. It's not the flag of registry. It's not the owner. This is a third-party entity that assures everyone the ship has met its requirements for international law. It's not going to be surprising to see a potential P&I club spring up from a new state somewhere that will offer insurance from this. Now, I said before, they can come up with a new P&I club away from the 13 that are out there. They can self-insure. The country of Russia can self-insure these vessels, or they can sail without insurance. However, we've seen some measures against the latter. Turkey just announced that as of December 1st, it will not allow any vessel to transit the Turkish Straits without insurance. That is an effort to prevent Black Sea tankers coming out without insurance. That's a pretty good measure to prevent that. It'll be interesting to see if the Danes, the Swedes, and the Norwegians do the same thing with entrance out of the Baltic, coming through the Skattaghat and the Kattegat out into the North Sea. That's going to be an interesting issue if that comes up. But what we're seeing right now is Russia is preparing to be able to haul its oil on this ghost fleet to avoid EU G7 sanctions. They're hauling that oil out to countries like India, China, Turkey, in Africa, the Middle East, everywhere. Because remember, all you got to do with Russian oil is refine it. Once you refine it, it's a brand new product, and you can sell it to anyone. It is clear of the sanctions at the point, which is a big, major change. Last is a pair of stories by Greg Miller, one of which I mentioned in this week's What the Ship. This one, what do crazy $500,000 per day rates say about shipping demand? And again, he's talking about that big issue of ton miles. And then the other story he has here is equally important, the chaos theory, how tankers thrive amid an energy crisis and war. So while we're talking about crude oil right here, I'm just going to mention this one aspect about liquefied natural gas because it kind of goes hand in hand. Because Europe is losing its crude oil, they use that crude oil for power generation, also for refining into diesel and consumption. And they've offset that with the use of liquefied natural gas. And we had a story the other week where we're talking about, and it's still ongoing, of liquefied natural gas tankers sitting off the coast of Europe right now. This chart shows you where they're sitting with approximately 40 ships tied up right now in storage due to congestion and a situation called contango. And what contango is that the value of the product, the spot market currently for the product, is worth less than what the future will hold. And what happens sometimes is tanker owners, either LNG or diesel or crude, will hold the cargo in the ship and wait for that price to increase and then sell it on the open market for a higher price. But one of the things that Greg talks about in that last story there, where he talks about the chaos theory, is he attended the Money Matters conference, which is really the shipping money. It's where all the big guys in shipping attend in New York, and they talk about what's going on with shipping. Number one, the party hasn't even started yet, which is the key. Is like, if you think the tanker market is in a flux right now, we're not even there yet. Talked about the fact that this is going to be the worst energy crisis since 1979, 1980. And again, this is not Greg. This is quotes from people who are attending this conference, including the leading tanker firms are saying this. The fight for LNG is going to heat up in 2023. Right now, we're in a position where we got excess LNG sitting off Europe. But if it gets cold in Europe all of a sudden, and more importantly, if Asia, particularly China, South Korea, and Japan, start buying up that LNG and start offering high prices for it, it's going to be a big problem. And then we have the scramble for diesel with sanctions on Russia looming on the horizon. I want to give you an idea about what is happening in the tanker market. Now, let me be clear about something. I am not a finance person. I am not giving you stock advice at all. I just want to show you what's happening with the top oil companies in the world. So this is from Daily Logistics, the top 10 tanker shipping companies in the world. And I pulled up their finances right here. So this is the stats. I'll go through the top 10 companies and I'll add the 11th one there. So TK is the biggest tanker firm out there, and you can see their stats over the past year. Been a pretty steady climb. Come over here to Euronav, kind of the same thing right here. And on both these, they're very strong buys they're showing. Again, I'm not giving you stock advice. This is Scorpio, another one. See the growth in Scorpio. Over here, Frontline, I'm going to go back 1 year. You see the growth in Frontline. DHT, we see the growth in DHT. Sakos Energy Navigation, again, same thing. All of these are being recommended as strong buy. This is one of them that isn't. This is Navios Maritime Partners. This is recommending a sell. I'm going to come back to this in a second. This one right here, Ship Finance, SFL, a weak buy. Over here, this is International Seaways. Again, this is a strong buy. You see a growth. And then this is Overseas Shipping Group. This is a U.S. company, and you see this as a buy. And I'll add one other one here. This is FLNG. This is Flex LNG, an LNG carrier. You see it here. So all of these are pretty much recommended as strong buys, with the one exception, Navios. But I want to go back for a second. If you go back 5 years and look at Navios, look at where they are. They're holding at a pretty steady level right now. But more importantly, if you go back even further, and it's the same on all of these, if you go back even further, the tanker market since about 2015, 2016 has absolutely bottomed out and has been really on the bottom for a long time. Come over here to TK. This is the strongest of the group. You can see the same thing. But if you go back in their max, you see how they develop. And what that tells me is when the ocean carriers, the tanker company guys, are sitting there saying, hey, this is going to be worse than any time before. This is, you got a lot of indicators here that are showing you that the tanker market is really poised. Jay Mintzmeyer has been talking about this for a while. I think it's just his timing has been off on this for seeing it. And then you add Russia-Ukraine war into it, and all the pieces are coming into place here. You're going to lose Russian oil. You're going to have to haul Russian oil a much longer distance. Whatever excess capacity is out there is being bought up by Russia right now for the Ghost Fleet to move that Russian oil, which means clean oil, and when I say clean oil, I mean non-sanctioned oil, is going to have to move greater distance than ever before in a time when the tanker market is older than ever before, with less ships than ever before, with none being scheduled to be built right now. This is really a myriad of issues all coming together at the same time to produce a unique situation when it comes to energy. And we've seen the chaos this has caused in the energy market in Europe, in the United States, and around the world. We're seeing this. Diesel is high in the United States. Why? Because diesel is in demand in Europe and other places. And when that happens, it has a worldwide impact. This is a chart from the IEA that shows you the shock to the system caused by the Russian invasion of Ukraine. This is basically a metric or a matrix set up based on an index with 1 September 2020 being the 100 level way back here. And you can see how we've spiked up here with the spike in things like North Sea Brent, that's crude oil from the North Sea, Asian spot LNG, European natural gas. All these measures are basically fueling this growth. And what we're about to see here, again, is the impact of that across the board. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you'll be alerted about new videos as they come out. Leave a comment, share it across social media, give it a thumbs up, and if you can, support the page. How do you do that? Well, one of two ways. One, you can hit the super thanks button below where you can contribute directly to the page, or head on over to Patreon. You'll see a link to it at the end of the video or down in the show notes, and you can become a monthly, yearly subscriber to the channel. I appreciate all the assistance I get in keeping this page up and running. Until our next video, this is Sal, signing off.